It's really my pleasure to be here to talk to many of colleagues and some of you friends from past talks, and I hope I can make new friends and new colleagues here today. So I'm going to be the nerd who's going to get up and talk about statistics, because Chef Ann was so passionate and said so many great things, but the question is, have we evaluated them to see if they're true? And is what she's saying truly what's going on in schools around the country? So I'm putting you on the hot seat. So as a nutrition professor, and there's two of us in this room, a colleague of mine who will be speaking later, we really have to sort of bridge the gaps between biological sciences and public health nutrition. In the last 20 years that I've been on the faculty, I started out doing a lot of biological sciences, trying to understand why B vitamins were good or trying to understand why fiber was good. And more of my research in the last 5 years has been public health nutrition, and to me has been much more rewarding because I get to hang out with great people like you. I've done a lot of work with Project Bread and Scott Richardson. It's really been very rewarding. And actually, I found out for once that my research makes a difference. So that's something also that's very appealing to a professor. So let's start out with the problem that most of you are aware of. This was the obesity rates among adults back in the 60s. We had about 10% here. This was the number that were overweight, and this is the number that were normal weight or underweight. As we sort of click through time, you can see what has happened to the adults population in the US, and this is sort of our most recent data, where we have 1/3 of the population is obese. That's a BMI of over 30, and 25 to 30 is the overweight, and normal weight is a BMI of under 25. So you wonder where our kids learn it from. We are wonderful role models for our children. So this is over 50 years, and this is what happens to our kids over the same time period. So you can see this is 6 to 11-year-olds, and this is 12 to 19-year-olds, and this is the prevalence of obesity among kids. So I probably just stole my colleague's first two slides, but she'll show you them later. So we clearly have a problem. It's not that all 18-year-olds are not overweight and suddenly they go to college and everybody gains weight and well, some of them do, but not all of them. But the problem is really starting at a much younger age, and I think it really does, has its greatest impact. We can have the greatest impact with school lunch because that's where kids learn about what to eat. It's fed to them, and as it was said before, it's in school, so it must be right. The problem is our biology hasn't kept up with our food supply. It took us 2.5 million years to evolve to really make very good use of energy because energy was scarce. Over the last 50 years, energy has been cheap, and we don't do much during the day, and so now we have very cheap forms of energy that are everywhere, at our inner schools, that are the second we walk out of our schools, and that also in our homes. So there's a lot to work on, and I think no one thing will be a single solution, but it really is a system solution that we have to look for. And a lot of people have written great books about this. I'm not advocating one or the other. Kelly Brownell is a colleague and friend, and there's so much that we live in that is a toxic food environment. Wouldn't it be nice if while they're at schools, kids would be a little protected from the toxic food environment? You could tell kids to read these books. I'm sure it won't have the impact that it would if you have them watch TV, which is what they usually do, where we have someone who's a Harvard-trained physician selling things that will have, not selling things, talking about miracles and bottles and wonderful things that can be done if you just take this magic pill or just do this one magic thing. Finally, there was actually a scientific article that evaluated Dr. Oz that found out that about 2/3 of what he said, there was actually absolutely no scientific proof. So now the role models that the kids are living with at home are probably the parents who are watching that Dr. Oz. So unfortunately, we have a lot of things around us which are a toxic food environment. He was actually called to task. There was a Senate hearing where they said, Dr. Oz, why are you doing this? Why are you selling things? Why are you talking about things that have so little scientific proof? And what was his answer is, I want to give people hope, which to me is, in other words, we should just give everybody processed foods because it tastes good. That's the wrong answer. So I think the best way that I have seen to reach kids is to show them movies. That's where they're used to seeing things on screens. Unfortunately, they don't get as much now through books. I would love it if they all read books. Read The Omnivore's Dilemma. You'll get a lot out of it. It's a great book. My son, maybe I'm personalizing this too much. My son watched Super Size Me at age 7. He doesn't go by a McDonald's now without going, oh, that's disgusting. And he does not eat very healthy. We have to keep on him. But there is a scene about 15 minutes into the movie where the guy has 2 quarter pounders with cheese and throws up out the window. And that was enough for my 7-year-old never to want to go to McDonald's again. I think these movies should be part of the curriculum. And while we're teaching kids about sex ed and cocaine, they should see many of these movies over and over again because it will sink in. And I think they'll then hopefully teach their parents that maybe it's not a great idea to stop at a fast food restaurant every night on the way home. And not everybody's right, but these are really powerful statistics that come out of these movies. We actually screened Fed Up at Harvard, thanks to Emily, about 6 months ago. And they each have little pieces of the puzzle, but they are really quite informative, just the way Chef Ann was so passionate about the statistics she showed us today. So I think this is another way to reach children, because on the other side of it, the industry is spending $15 to $20 billion teaching them about a bad environment, teaching them how to, when you're watching the World Cup, there's, advertisements for Sprite and Coke and all sorts of other things that constantly flash up on the screen. The poor soccer, the people who own soccer teams, there aren't half times, there aren't timeouts, they can't show you commercials. So they have to show you the commercials while you're watching soccer. So it is quite a toxic food environment. And wouldn't it be nice if every day we could just sort of walk down the aisle and pick out what fruits we were going to eat today, and we all lived in this world? And as Scott said, a lot of us probably do live in this world. And it gives us great opportunity to get fruits and vegetables which are relatively cheap compared to what other countries spend on their food. There's other environments where fruit and vegetables are a little more sparse. They're a little more food deserts, and I think there's lots of great plans out there to try to bring healthier fruits and vegetables. But what's really troubling to me is that in this same store, which was a small grocery store, where they sold these a few fruits, they advertised Pepsi with advertisements saying, "We accept food stamps," underneath the Pepsi. Why don't you put that underneath the fruits? Now, I'm guessing this was not done by the store owner. I'm guessing this was done by the distributor of Pepsi, who had they stock the shelves, and they also put the reminder to people that if you're on food stamps, you can buy Pepsi cheap. So there's a lot of things wrong that our kids get at home, and that we can try to fix in schools. So Louisa asked me to talk about what kids are eating, so I really have 2 slides on that. And then the rest of it, I'm going to talk about what I'm doing to try to make it better. So this is what kids are eating. This is from the NHANES, which is national statistics. So they have about 14% of their energy from protein, 32% from fat, and 53% from carbs, which is just about exactly the same as what adults eat in this country. Unfortunately, this doesn't really tell you enough, because you don't know how much of the fat is saturated fat and how much is polyunsaturated fat, which is healthy fat. You don't know how much of the carbs are white bread and how much of the carbs actually are from whole grains. So these are nice statistics, and they are great inputs for things, but this actually is where kids have been eating for the last 10 to 15 years. It actually hasn't moved that much. And when you see calories go up, sometimes it's because they're exercising more in schools. So there hasn't been huge changes in what kids are eating in terms of the numbers here, but what's the components is what's concerning. So from these same analyses from NHANES, which are the national statistics, the average child in elementary to high school has about 14.5 grams of fiber, and they should probably be around 25. This is what our USDA dietary guidelines say. So yes, they're having lots of processed carbohydrates that has the fiber taken out and probably put into other things. How about sodium? I was actually surprised at how low this number is. They have somewhere between 3 and 3.5 grams of sodium, where we need probably 1,500 to 1,600. The guidelines say go up to 2,200, probably because lobbying efforts by people who are from the Salt Institute. But I should apologize before I started. If I'm a little flip, I apologize if I offend anybody, but sometimes I've become too passionate about this. And potassium, which is good for your blood pressure, we're nowhere near where we should be getting our potassium levels. So the last part of this is added sugar. And so what are they eating? Don't get me started on this. The max should be 10% of calories of added sugar, and even that, it's not like we need added sugar to survive. We have plenty of calories around. We don't need added sugar. The average child has between 1.5 and 2 cans of soda today, and if you're on food stamps, it's 2.5 to 3 cans of soda a day. Food stamps have no regulations, and I'm not going to be the big brother up here saying if you're on food stamps, what can you buy or what can you not? But if the average family of 4 can get $500 to $600 a month from food stamps, you actually can go to the store and buy all Pepsi and Snicker bars. There's no regulations whatsoever. You can't buy alcohol, and you can't buy heated food. So you can't buy the rotisserie chicken, but you can buy a frozen chicken or you can buy Snickers and Coca-Cola. We are now doing analyses on what the government knows what people on food stamps are buying. They haven't actually released that yet. So we're going to try to do an end around, and we're actually working with grocery stores to try to document what is being eaten by people on food stamps, because we want to help. We want to help in the school lunchroom, and we want to help in the grocery store because that's where our food comes from. So Chef Ann showed this, I love your plate, so much better. This is a great place to start, and the best thing about this tool is that kids now know, they have been taught, that half their plate should be fruits and vegetables. All the rest of it's kind of, I don't know what that means, grains, protein. I don't go to a store and just buy protein. It's very hard for kids to sort of understand what this means, but they do know what fruits and vegetables mean. And unfortunately, kids are really good at learning, they're just not good at implementing. So there have been many studies where they've taught this in curriculum, this and previous trainings from the government. They taught it in curriculum. You get to the end of a 2-year curriculum, kids can perfectly regurgitate what a healthy diet is and then go to McDonald's. So it doesn't sink in unless we have programs like Chef Ann and Scott were talking about, where there really is a chef involved, where we respect the help in the kitchen and we respect the child who's eating it. Because that, I think, is when it works, when this works. So yes, we were a little stuck up at Harvard and we made our own plate that Chef Ann nicely advertised for us that you can get for free from nutritionsource.org. But the My Plate really is too simple, because if you really were a diligent kid, you could say, okay, the protein, that's a hamburger. The dairy, that'll be ice cream. The grains will be white bread bun for my hamburger. The fruit is apple juice, and the vegetable is French fries. That actually fits myplate.gov. So that's why we kind of changed what's there, was a bit more text, and it'd be great if you hang this on your refrigerator at home or hand it out to kids. I don't know the best way for it to sink in. I think we just have to get enough of these messages to sink in so that it becomes part of what kids want to strive for. And I think it is important to have, as part of any plate, that calories in, you need to also burn calories by being a bit more active. So it has been mentioned about what schools must require. So this is some of the research that we've done now that's ongoing. I'm going to actually show you some things that are unpublished, so I can't share all my slides. And Scott has pointed out that it's really bad to talk later in the day, because then you're presenting slides that people already talked about. So, the former school requirements were that you must offer fruit, vegetable, grain, milk, or meat alternative. And a child had to take 3 of these to be reimbursable. So most kids would not choose the first 2. They would just take the grain, the milk, or the meat alternative. Or they would take the vegetable, which we did in some pilot studies in the Boston Public Schools. They would take the vegetable, walk over to the garbage plate, dump out the vegetable, and then sit down and have their tater tots and French fries, or tater tots and cheeseburger. So we had to fix something. The current school meal requirements do increase the amount of fruits and vegetables, require a variety of vegetables. At least half the grains have to be whole grains, and then I still don't understand why we can offer flavored milk. I mean, would you sit down and actually give a child 4 or 5 teaspoons of sugar every time they ate a meal? And sometimes just visualizations like that, that's how to get parents involved. Say, hey, this is the chocolate milk that your child's able to get every day through a reimbursable lunch. Do you mind if I give them 5 teaspoons of sugar while we're sitting here? It can have an impact, and what Chef Ann did, those kind of things can have an impact to really get enough parents upset. Now, I'm standing here knowing that the chef who is the food service director in my child's school is sitting right here. And I'm so delighted that Chef Alden is here, because he actually has done a lot with the Brookline school systems that mirrors what's going on in Colorado. So thanks for coming, Chef Alden. And I'm delighted that our food service director actually is a chef, not saying that all food service directors are or need to be, but I think it maybe helps relate better to the food service labor. So you must serve a fruit or a vegetable, and then you have to have 2 other components. So what happened when these guidelines first came out? Everybody screamed, we have the most fruits and vegetables in the trash of any country in the nation. Everybody was screaming, we're forcing kids to have fruits and vegetables, you're putting them on their plate, and they're just throwing them away. Does anybody hear that argument? When this first came out, everybody heard it. Where did that come from? I mean, it's nice to have one active parent who stands up and looks in the garbage can and says, damn, there's apples there. Our kids are throwing away apples. And a lot of school systems, it was one parent or 2 parents, or it was the food service director, or it was someone that was a parent that was helping at the school. No one had evaluated it. So we were lucky enough to be able to evaluate it, because we actually had done a lot of plate waste studies in a few school systems in Massachusetts to see what kids were throwing out before the regulations went in place and what they were throwing out afterwards. No one ever thought of screaming about it before. So we actually we went to 1,030 students in a few communities in relatively poor neighborhoods in Massachusetts. And this was for a different study, but we had a plate waste studies on 1,000 kids done about 4 times over the course of a year. What does a plate waste study mean? This was done by my student, then postdoc, and now a future faculty member at Merrimack College, Juliana Cohen, and with Scott's incredible help. But what plate waste means is you hire 12 or 15 research assistants. A lot of them were undergraduates at Harvard and Tufts and Framingham State University. And a kid comes in and they buy their meal like they usually do, and there's a number on the plate. And you tell the kid, don't worry about throwing it away when you're done, we'll take care of it. So we know what they took from the school lunch because there's someone standing by the register making a quick note that plate number 1743 had this, 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 and this. And then when the kid's done, they stand up and walk away, and we weigh everything that's left on the plate. So we can tell you down to the ounce what the kid ate of each type of food. This was a big effort. Some of it came through a grant from Project Bread, from Robert Wood Johnson, and from the Arbella Foundation, which was a foundation in Massachusetts that funds useful projects like this to see what's going on. So we actually looked at what happened before the regs went in place and what happened after. And there actually was a slight drop in milk. Now that actually went away after a short bit of time, but this is just selecting, right? So they selected the same amount of vegetables. They actually selected more fruit because they were forced to, right? The new reg said you have to take one fruit or vegetable. So the question is, were they throwing it all away? And in fact, they were eating more of their entree. The milk was about the same. They were eating more of their vegetables, and they're eating the same amount of fruit, but they were taking a lot more of it. So overall, they actually were eating more fruits and vegetables after the regulations than they were before. And this was the first time that what we did actually then became part of a Senate hearing. And everybody would say and stand up and say, well, a recent Harvard study has concluded that under the updated standards, kids are now eating 16% more vegetables and 23% more fruit and lunch. Thank goodness we actually had data to substantiate something that before was just someone looking in a trash can and then seeing apples. We were throwing away a lot more before. We're actually moving in the right direction. So I have a very close colleague who works at CSPI, Center for Science and Public Interest, who she came to visit because she got an alumni award from Harvard. And she said, this is so cool that this Harvard study did that. And I said, do you know who did that Harvard study? She said, I have no idea. We just keep calling it the Harvard study. So I said, that's fine with me. Just call it whatever you want. Now this actually has been replicated by the Rudd Center. They saw the exact same thing in a community in Connecticut. So thank goodness the new regulations are doing something. Time to eat. Chef Ann said, kids need more time to eat. Has anybody actually evaluated that? It just seems like common sense. They need more time to eat. But I have a 15-year-old son. There are times when he sits down and has a meal, everything on his plate in 7 minutes. Now, I know he's got to go out and play basketball with a friend, but is that, is he not eating as much on his plate because he only has 7 minutes or 10 minutes or 15 minutes? So once again, we had thousands of these plate waste studies, and on the same kid in the same year, sometimes they had 18 minutes to eat their lunch, sometimes they had 27 minutes to eat their lunch, depending on where they were in the line. So if you're kind of slow getting to the lunchroom, it took you like 8 minutes to get up to the line and sit down, and the remaining time was, do you really have in the next 14 minutes enough time to eat your fruits and vegetables and drink your milk and have your entree? Does anybody want to guess what happened? We guessed so wrong on this. And everybody says you have to give kids more time to eat. So here's what happened. So for those kids that had more than 25 minutes to eat, they ate 77%. This is actually consumption. They didn't, we actually also looked at selection, but we looked at consumption. So they had 77% of their entree, 63% of their fruit, 47% of their vegetables, and 73% of their milk. Now let's look at the kids that had a little bit less time. They ate actually less of their entree, about the same amount of their fruit, less of their vegetable, and less of their milk. In less than 20 minutes, these are kids who are way in the back of the line the second time around. They actually had even less of their entree, the same amount of fruit, less of their vegetable, and less of the milk. So I for sure thought they were going to sit down, eat the entree, drink their milk, and just throw away their fruits and vegetables. But in fact, even with less time, the key here that I'm not showing you is that the only thing that they regulated was that they took less fruit. For some reason or other, kids figured out if they saw a whole apple and they only had 8 minutes to eat their lunch, it probably was going to take a while to chomp through the apple, so they just didn't take it. But almost everything went down except for the fruit. So I agree with Chef Ann, and now we have data to show it. This is unpublished, but that you do need enough time in the school lunchroom for a child to eat everything on their plate because they're missing out on nutrients in the entree, the vegetables, and the fruit. So this is actually a almost in-press article that we just got comments back from the journal. So coming to you soon through, hopefully we'll then go to the USDA and someone will say, a Harvard study showed that lunches need to be at least 25 minutes. So there's another thing out there that I'm sure that you have heard about because Brian Wansink has talked about it a lot, and lots of people have used choice architecture as a way to nudge people. It was mentioned up here. Is there ways that we can nudge kids to take healthier foods without them knowing it? Kind of stealth health, and that is like rearrange the lunchroom. And I talked with Alden about this when we walked through Brookline schools. You walk in, sorry Alden, you walk into the Brookline schools and you see them serving pizza. That's like the first thing you see. So that's still, the first thing you see is pizza. And some of it is because the frickin' school is so old, that's the only place they actually can heat it up and get the pizza there. Otherwise, we'd have to have more labor to walk it across. But they have a fantastic salad bar, which my son claims he's eating now every day, which I'll be able to check electronically. But there are things that you can show. He doesn't like me when he doesn't like when I do that. And there are great things. I have been with Compass Foods where they recreated the Fidelity lunchroom. If you go down to Fidelity, which is a big company here, people can eat at the Fidelity lunchroom. It's awesome. You walk in, there's 2 huge salad bars in front of you. There's all this great food, and sort of some of the French fries and cheeseburgers, what you really want, it's kind of in the back, and the chocolate milk is kind of hidden, and they have the Diet Coke in front of you instead of the Coke. And so there's a lot of choice architecture you can use to kind of nudge people to do the right thing or wrong thing. Can you do it with a kid who, as Scott mentioned, goes to the same place 180 times a year to eat their lunch? And if you nudge them, does a nudge wear off? Well, let's evaluate it. I think you see a theme here. So we created a smart cafe. We called it a smart cafe, which was to move the chocolate milk behind the white milk. We put, in the lunch line, you put all the healthy vegetables first instead of the cheeseburger, the tater tots. And so the kids, the first thing they see, if they're really hungry, they're going to take vegetables. We put the healthier sandwiches in clear wrap so the kids can say, oh, I see that, instead of like an aluminum foil wrap that you put it on the foods that are barely good enough to be there. And you make the fruits and vegetables look really nice, and you put cues for them in a line. These are all great things that have been proposed out there. And instead of using those tin trays, you put them in like nice baskets so it looks like it just came from the farm. And then for little kids, you can actually rename the foods Zesty Black Bean Quesadilla because it sounds like it's Mediterranean, and Santa Fe chicken. I'm sure most of the kids have no idea where Santa Fe is, but they've seen it in restaurants. So our aims and hypothesis were that we either could put a chef in a school, thanks to Project Bread, where a chef could be there 1 or 2 days a week, teach the help how to chop up fruits and vegetables and how to serve healthier, tastier foods. We had a chef. Or we could do this sort of smart cafe where we could see if we could dupe the kids by putting healthier food where they would grab it. Maybe I'm sort of giving you the punchline ahead of time. So we wanted to look at the short-term and long-term impacts. Anything short-term. If you go on a diet, I don't care if it's the paleo diet, the Atkins diet, a low-fat diet. If you're into it, the first month it's going to work. So we wanted to look at the short-term impacts of the smart cafe versus the long-term impacts of the smart cafe versus short-term impacts of the food tasting good because there's a chef there and the kid feels like the chef is respecting them as an individual and cares about the food. So we hypothesized that if you had both of these, it would be like nirvana, that you would get to the end of this and kids would just be going crazy over healthy food because they had all these ways to get it. So we tried some of these things. Look, here's the beautiful basket of apples and oranges. We even had like a fake carrot that was taped here. It's like, wow, this is real choice architecture. We hid the chocolate milk in the back. You can still find it, but ultimately so many kids got mad and the kitchen help got mad that they were like ripping their crate of chocolate milk from behind and putting it in front so the kids can find it. And we had cool names like fresh chilled fruit. So we had, we did everything we could. Ultimately, there were kids that stole the carrot, so we had to put a paper version there after week 1. And then alternatively, we had chef, and there's a few chefs. One that I think that is here, Chef Guy is here, right, who's helped out with this. This is Chef Kirk. We had a few chefs that have tried this in Boston and a few other communities around the Boston area where they kind of made, this is whole wheat pasta with turkey meatballs and whole grain bread and a chopped up salad where the kids had a chance to sort of taste test it so they felt like they were part of the decision. And so these were the two different interventions that we were putting back to back. And maybe I shouldn't go through all this for time. I have 5 minutes left. But ultimately, you can dupe kids into taking things. So if you have the things look nice, and they actually selected the selection for the Smart Cafe. They were selecting a bit more fruits and vegetables. And this is the one where we had the Smart Cafe and we had the chef there. So they were selecting, 79% of them were selecting fruit. And the healthier chef actually was the best for selecting vegetables. But this was the long-term sort of impact was, while it worked short-term, it didn't work long-term. Kids, after 180 days, they are not going to be fooled by something that doesn't taste good. They're not going to be fooled necessarily by a basket of apples that looks like it just came from the farm. If they don't like the taste of it, they're not going to do it. And ultimately, by the end, we had, in those schools where we had a chef there, whether it would be a chef with the Smart Cafe or not, the kids were eating more vegetables, they were eating a bit more fruit, and overall sort of eating a healthier meal. So I really do support what Chef Ann is saying, is that we have to respect all aspects of the food, that it's not a place to try to trick people's minds, because it's not a short-term purchase. Kids are vested in this 180 days a year for, in some cases, 12 years. So conclusions from this is schools should consider using both choice architecture and collaborating with chefs. And I think, I don't know if Jody's here, I think she had to run out. I love celebrity chefs and I love Jody Adams. It's really hard to get a school involved with a celebrity chef because kids go out all excited for 2 days, for a week, for 2 weeks. The celebrity chefs have a job. They can't be there all the time. And ultimately that kind of fades away. So it needs to be built into the infrastructure of the school. And I think it's something that we as a population have to put more value in. And Scott showed great comparisons between the defense budget and the food budget, but it doesn't take a lot to have the sort of a little bit more passion put into the food. So I think we have to put more time in thinking about what we serve rather than how we serve it. So my last little bit, I'll talk about competitive foods, because Massachusetts was, as Bettina mentioned, was sort of ahead of the ball. And this law, that the law went into place nationally in 2014, but we had it in place in 2012. So did it work? If you have only healthy competitive foods in schools, does it work? Well, no one really knew that. Everybody, all food service directors, I'm sure some of you in this room, were going to say, we're going to lose money. Kids are going to stop buying food out of the vending machines because they're not going to give them access to Snickers bars and Doritos. So we actually analyzed this. And I won't go through all of this, but the law in the country went into effect in 2014, but went into effect in August 2012 in Massachusetts. Smart snacks in schools have to be a whole grain product. The first ingredient has to be fruit, vegetable, dairy product, or protein food. It has to be a combination food with at least a quarter cup of fruit and or vegetable. You can see the lobbying efforts that must have gone into every word in this to try to get their food approved for being a smart snack. In Massachusetts, we called it competitive foods. That was the competitive food, part of the competitive food bill. But that didn't sound sexy, so we called them smart snacks instead. So nationally, they're now called smart snacks. So it has limits on total fat. Exception is nuts and a few other things that have healthy fats. It can have very little, essentially zero trans fats. And then there's rules that are going into place about sodium and calories and total sugar, and there's exemptions for dried food. So there's a lot of rules that were kind of tricky because we knew some foods were healthy, but they were getting excluded, so you kind of put them in on the side. So yes, you can have nuts, and yes, you can have dried food. So the biggest issue was the beverages. There was a lot of Gatorade in vending machines. We kind of got Coke and Pepsi out. There were a lot of sports drinks that came in because we said, oh, kids that need them, they're exercising. You don't need a sports drink unless you're exercising hard for an hour. Please don't let your son or daughter tell you when they come off the baseball field, if they're standing there like this for an hour, that they need to go buy a Gatorade. There is no need for that Gatorade. So these are the rules for the smart snacks in schools. So we, some of you maybe were part of this, the Nourish study, aptly named by my postdoc, Juliana Cohen. We went in to evaluate what was being sold in schools beforehand and what was there in schools after. This was an unfunded mandate. The state of Massachusetts said, you must do this. And every school went, damn, I got to do this, even though the state of Massachusetts was not walking into every school to check what they're doing. The only people that were walking into schools to see what they were doing was a few of us. So we went in, we took pictures beforehand and took pictures afterwards, and we were not about to sort of point fingers and saying, you are not doing a good job. So here's what happened. This is just describing the law that went into effect in Massachusetts. So we went to every vending machine in every school we could. We got, whoops, let me go back up here. We went into about 60 or 70 schools. We oversampled schools in lower income areas. So we took pictures of everything in their vending machine, and then we walked up to the vending machine and took a picture of every food in the vending machine so that we could figure out what's in it. And then we did at the school store. Some of the school stores we saw were absolutely beautiful, full of Snickers bars and Milky Ways and things like that. So it was actually very hard to do the school stores. And then we went into the a la carte. We talked to the food service director. We went to the a la carte line. Here we go. 36 out of the 184 eligible districts we asked collaborated. So we had 36 districts and 2 schools in each district. So we had 72 schools where we were kind of spying around. And we looked at every school had smart snacks in them before the law went into effect. This is what some of it looked like. They were all over the school. Sometimes the food service director didn't even know about the vending machine that we found in the back hallway that was run by the basketball team. So, but there's a lot of money that's generated from this that goes to the school band and goes to other things. And so how can we, or how can the state be saying, take away that money? So we have done a bit of evaluation of that. So in general, the food service directors reported that it was important to have stakeholders supportive. So it was important to have the superintendent, to have the wellness committee saying, this is important, we want you to do this. And here's what we found. So let's just look at the middle schools. So before the law, there was no law. You could sell Snickers bars or Milky Ways. So 46% of the foods were compliant before the law went into effect. That's actually pretty good. I thought it was going to be 10%. I thought it was going to be all Snickers bars. But they actually did have some healthy foods. Afterwards, 86.5% of the foods in the middle schools and 80% of the foods in the high schools, this is the beverages, were compliant. So that is pretty good. Food service directors said, damn, here's a law. We're going to pull out the Gatorade, and we're going to put in things like water and sparkling water and things like that the kids would eat. We did this in a comparison state. I won't name it. It's nearby, because we wanted to make sure there weren't big national trends going on. And in this comparison state, it didn't make a difference from one year to the next. That's good. That's called our control state. Everything was the same for beverages for middle school and high school. Then we looked at foods. Foods were a little bit harder. Unfortunately, what we found is there's a lot of baked Doritos that barely get over the line for being a smart snack. And in fact, the Doritos that are now sold as smart snacks are different than the Doritos that you buy in the grocery store. So again, there's some great advertising that's going on by Doritos because they lowered the sodium a little bit and they made the serving size a little bit smaller, so it just barely makes the standards. Now, there's lots of other foods that are making it, and I don't want to be a negative person. And I hope this is the first year we evaluated it. We're just finishing with the second year, and I'm happy to say the schools have actually gotten better, that they actually are trying harder, mostly because there's more companies out there providing food that you can put in the vending machines. Before, it was actually harder to find foods that kids would eat that you could put in the vending machine. So we also now evaluated, were the schools losing money? Did we do a bad thing by saying, take the Snickers out of the? So what happened? Anybody want to take a guess? They actually did not lose money. They lost a lot of money on their vending machines, but kids stopped eating lunch out of the vending machine and instead bought lunch. So actually they moved from the vending machine to the school lunch line, so there's actually been more money made by what's been purchased now, healthier foods in the school lunch than in the vending machine. So to me, that's a win, and we obviously want to continue to evaluate that. So I'll stop now. Children in the U.S. obviously have inadequate diets, and there's a lot of great things going on. We have to keep up the efforts that Chef Ann talked about. Be patient. Children may need good role models to eat healthy and to try foods many, many times. I showed you when you put a chef in the school, and Scott will tell you this, it's not like one day you walk in and the child sees a chef there and says, cool, I'm going to eat this. It actually took 6 months and many times more than that to slowly rotate out the menu, slowly get the foods in that were different from the other foods, have tastings so the kids can kind of feel like they're part of it. So sometimes it's 6 months or a year to get kids to try something. And there actually has been some studies on this. Sometimes to get broccoli in a child, they have to try it 15 to 20 times. So great ideas in school need long-term evaluation. I know I'm saying that because that's what I do. But there are lots of great ideas where people say, oh, go do this. And it's a great idea and lasts for a week. So I think we need long-term evaluation because ultimately the USDA will not change policy unless there's something to say we can prove it worked or we can prove it didn't work. And that's what they've told me to my face. When I said, here's a great idea, they said, prove it. So now 3 years later, we finally have proven it. So if you build it, that's the smart snack laws. They will come. And I think ultimately schools are serving healthier smart snacks, and the industry is making healthier smart snacks. It's not just Doritos. There are actually great vending machine companies that have now vending machines that are just healthy foods. So I think we're getting there. And if anybody, I know I don't have time for questions now, but if anybody wants to send me questions or get in contact with me, everybody apparently at Harvard, you can do this. You can say first name _ last name at harvard.edu, and it gets to you. So thank you very much for your time and your attention.